On this episode of The Issue on the ASGCT podcast network, we have an in-depth interview with Sabrina Mogle, co-founder of RareMoon Consulting. We talked about what drove her to dedicate her career to the orphan and drug and advanced therapy space, and what keeps her motivated today, helping clients navigate regulatory conversations on the path from idea to BLA. We also discussed her advice for clients in interacting with regulators, given the evolving CBER and global regulatory landscape. Do we make it through the whole episode without either of us providing the standard regulatory wisdom of "it depends"? You'll have to listen to find out. We hope you enjoy the conversation. As many of you know, the ASGCT annual meeting is right around the corner, and by all accounts, the program is really rounding into fantastic shape. Over the past few years, the annual meeting has grown into an industry-defining event, and I know full well how overwhelming the comprehensive program can be. Have there been times that I'm soundlessly watching another session on my phone to know when to dart across the hall? You betcha. Luckily, ASGCT knows this too, so they've created session paths. These 6 soft track pathways through the annual meeting are designed to guide some of the most popular specialties through the premier event in gene and cell therapy. From first-time attendees to clinical specialties and gene editing or viral vectors, there's a guide for you at the ASGCT annual meeting. And as always, ASGCT members save big on annual meeting registration, $385 this year, whether you're attending virtually or in person in Baltimore, like I am. Find the session paths and register for the meeting today at annualmeeting.asgct.org. Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Issue podcast on the ASGCT network. Sabrina Mogle, thanks so much for joining the podcast today. I think many ASGCT members and listeners have probably heard about the regulatory consulting firm that you co-founded, RareMoon Consulting. Can you tell folks a little bit about what RareMoon does?
Yeah. Firstly, Emily, thank you so much for having me. I feel honored to be asked to do this, particularly given the panel of folks you're interviewing, and just honored to be asked by you, who I've had the opportunity to work closely with on a few programs and have always looked up to. So thank you so much. RareMoon. So RareMoon is an orphan drug and advanced therapy regulatory firm. We assist sponsors with securing orphan drug and rare pediatric designations, with advising on and securing expedited program designations and pathways. We also spend a lot of our time advancing programs through the regulatory framework, from IND enabling studies through to pivotal trial designs, preparing for meetings, aiding in meeting strategies, formulating questions, et cetera. We also support our clients with a multinational perspective as well, just by navigating foreign regulations and advising on ways to harmonize North American and European development plans. As for how we came about, so RareMoon was really created at a turning point in my life. I had lost my father to GBM in 2009, and I was working in the industry, yet I knew nothing about GBM. I knew nothing about rare diseases and had little knowledge about the effect the small number of orphan drug approvals had on the world. Looking back, Emily, I had worked on multiple non-clinical programs in the rare disease space, but orphan drugs and the nuances and challenges in developing medicines for rare disease patients wasn't on my mind. Shortly after, that experience with my father, I found myself working in orphan drug regulations under the ex-director of the Office of Orphan Products with a new mission to do whatever I possibly could to advance medicines to patients with GBM and other rare and devastating diseases. And really during that time, I had quickly identified with my new mission, I had identified a need in the industry for a team of what I like to call special forces, a team of experts that would do whatever they could do to help move a program forward. And particularly in the biotech industry with emerging technologies, emerging regulatory trends, and the need to stay abreast of all of these latest innovations. I had really identified a gap within the consulting and CRO space where I hadn't come across more than maybe a few CROs in consulting firms that were set up to provide truly hands-on service and solutions as and when needed to startups, to small biotech companies, to gene therapy manufacturers. So I started RareMoon with a partner, Chris Novoshinsky, and build a team of experts who own problems and who just adopt challenges as their own. We've kind
Yeah.
of, go ahead, please.
No, I love how you just described that, the adopting challenges as their own, because I think we see that a lot in the cell and gene therapy field. The people who sort of work in this part of the industry, what I think keeps us all in it is we have some sort of personal connection, or we have some sort of, personal history, perhaps, that sort of gets us so engaged that we're willing to sort of step up and say, okay, how do I navigate this? How do I help the team navigate this? Like, what do we do next? How do we solve it?
I love that about
Yeah.
this direct industry. I love that about the advanced therapy space. I love that about the rare disease space. I think, we lose sleep for other people's problems. We lose sleep for the challenges that we're facing day in and day out. And I mean, I agree. And our team, our clients' teams, we're all made up of these incredibly intelligent, of course, but incredibly passionate individuals who share stories and who share the love, right, for this space and for our goals and our mission.
Yeah. And I also think that, I think this sort of hammers home, and part of the concept behind this podcast really is that for cell and gene therapy, it has to be a team effort, right? There's no way around it. Like, none of us will ever be expert enough in all the dimensions it takes to sort of pull together to develop one of these drugs. And that for me is also another part of the reward of this space, is getting to work on teams and figuring out how to optimize that. And, I think often in the regulatory role, you play part of that ringleader role of getting everyone on the same page of, how do we communicate this complicated science that's multidimensional, multifunctional, like, to a regulator, for sure.
Exactly. I mean, what's our message, right?
Right.
What is our message? What are we trying to convey? How do we educate them? How do we justify, rationalize everything about this program? Yeah, I mean, we've focused almost exclusively in the advanced therapy space for 9 years now, and having supported nearly 70 unique gene and cell therapy assets from early stage interact through to end of phase meetings, pivotal trials, BLAs. You're absolutely right. It is a team effort. And I think we've grown up we're growing up alongside regulators, alongside industry, alongside gene therapy manufacturers. We're all facing challenges for the first time together and overcoming those challenges for the first time together, especially with emerging and these like incredibly innovative technologies that are coming across our desk that we're sending across FDA's desk.
Right. And I think, double clicking on that, right? Like, the desk you're sending across, especially for advanced therapies at the FDA, is CBER, right? The Center for Biologics, which is different. When I was starting out, most of my background was in small molecule, siRNA, et cetera. all things governed by the CDER side of the FDA. But CBER is different. And I'm curious, as you work with clients who probably are maybe having their first at bat with CBER, like how do you coach them? How do you advise them about how to think about CBER as compared to CDER?
Yeah, that's a great question. First and foremost, we encourage them to throw anything out that they think they know about FDA if they've only ever worked with CDER. CBER is definitely a different center altogether in the way we communicate, in what their expectations are of us, of sponsors, how we address them. We start by early on preparing our clients with what to expect. And we manage those expectations throughout all of our interactions. We introduce best practices, and there are incredibly different best practices that we see in our experience in working with CBER versus CDER. Importantly, on the topic of innovation, we encourage our sponsors to not underestimate their expertise, meaning we prepare them to tell a comprehensive story, an educational story, justifying their approach in every element of their plan. When we take these comprehensive packages into the FDA, I mean, that's when we're seeing collaboration happen. That's when we're seeing programs move forward with less hurdles.
Right. Yeah. No, that's been my experience as well. So I think what you're saying is, for clients interacting with CBER, it's really about laying out the logic, laying out the elements of say the non-clinical de-risking plan in a way that helps the agency see why you did what you did, and educates them along the way, right? And sort of not maybe assuming that they've necessarily seen a project like this before, but also not assuming that they haven't. So it's really about navigating that line to say, here's the challenges that we all know about, this particular type of technology, and also here's how we broke it down and here's how we addressed it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, look, FDA CBER's done an amazing job at putting out a number of guidance documents, right? And early on, we identify the applicable ICH, the applicable gene therapy guidance documents to our program. However, the reality is we also acknowledge the lack of guidance documents for emerging and innovative technologies. So you're absolutely right. It's knowing how much information to put forward. And also, by the way, knowing that for CBER, I mean, there are so many meetings that we can have. And while we're seeing the FDA, we're seeing CBER implement some new opportunities in programs to support sponsors having more meetings, having a greater opportunity to meet with the agency. At the end of the day, we're talking one pre-IND meeting, maybe a type D meeting before we get to our IND. And then we're strategizing about what meetings can we have between then and say an RMAT designation or until we can gain a designation with clinical data that will get us more meetings, right? And taking all of that into consideration, knowing the workload at CBER. And whether or not we'll even get a meeting or a written response only. So we're always preparing for that. We're always preparing, I'd almost say, for worst case scenario, the least amount of meetings, right?
Right.
And at the most inopportune time. But it's all about the education. It's all about you said it exactly right, is explaining the logic behind why we did what we did and educating them on why we did what we did and the results and the impact those results have on the program.
Right. And I sort of liken it, for myself at least, into the concept of you're interacting with the agency on kind of two levels. The first level is just sort of, here's the logic of our narrative, here's the logic of, the experiments that we did and the results that we got, and here's our conclusions. And I think also, by laying that out in a coherent, cogent manner, you're on top of that saying, we're reasonable people. We're open to hearing your feedback. We want to interact, and we're, we are here to collaborate, right? So it's always like this two-layer of discussion that's being had, sort of part in form and part in content.
Exactly. Exactly. That's all part of the, I think, education that we provide sponsors, is helping to explain that. We've had companies go in with these incredibly comprehensive, thorough packages explaining everything, and even not just at FDA, but in European national agencies, Health Canada. We've had the opportunity to present these comprehensive packages and have really incredible discussions, and leading to knowing essentially exactly what to do following that meeting, which is what we all want to get out of any meeting with a regulator.
Exactly. And obviously sometimes they're sitting in their role as regulators. They obviously can't share with you what other sponsors have done or the problems that they've seen, right? But on the other hand, they can say, we need you to look at this. And I think, generally speaking, that advice is usually super important for sponsors to take on board and sort of figure out how best to incorporate it.
Yeah, I mean, you said it. At the end of the day, they are regulators. They have a job to do, right? They're not drug developers.
Right.
Thankfully, they're scientists. Thankfully, they have a passion just like we have, right? But yeah, I mean, I think it's on the onus of the sponsor to provide those details, to provide that comprehensive package for a discussion, for an effective conversation, and whether it be an actual face-to-face and conversation or whether it be written responses only. I do think it's on the onus of us to provide that information, to elicit the feedback that we're talking about right now, right?
Right. So out of curiosity, I mean, you guys at RareMoon, it's been what, 9 years, 8 years, 9 years that you've been working in this space. I'm curious, obviously there have been a lot of changes that have been teed up by the agency in the recent past. And like, what are you seeing as having the sort of biggest impact, or what do you predict will have the biggest impact as we sort of march forward and as CBER kind of evolves and grows?
Great question. CBER definitely is evolving. It's definitely growing, hopefully growing in a more rapid pace than it has been. I mean, we've seen the Office of Tissues and Advanced Therapies turn into a super office, and now creating smaller units with specialized units within that office. We've seen directors come and go, of course. I'm feeling pretty hopeful. Over the last probably 6 to 10 years, we've seen this office go from having informal discussions, from the clinical team leads, from the CMC leads, being open to picking up the phone when sponsors call them, to the CBER leadership team nixing those opportunities and going back to only having formal meetings. We've seen them implement Interact, but yet accept only so many of those submissions. Now, I think what we're seeing are quite a few commitments made from this office, which offer more time, more attention, specifically to orphan drug programs, specifically to advanced therapies. And this is both at CDER and CBER. But we're hearing more and more remarks from CBER exercising flexibility in their reviews, putting themselves out there, initiating and launching these pilot programs, which I think can potentially lead to some pretty impactful changes can lead to hopefully moving programs forward in a more maybe flexible, but also accelerated manner.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's true. Sometimes, the teams that we work on are just trying to get their heads around one small, very specific functional question, and that can have a lot of sort of downstream impacts. And when you're trying to help a team navigate that sort of, let's say we're post IND, the IND is up and running, but you've got this key question that you're trying to wrap your heads around. How do you encourage teams to think about these new programs that are available to them, and where do you coach them to try and invest their regulatory efforts, I guess?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, a lot of our questions are the same. They're around endpoints. They're around clinical trial designs, and we're initiating first in humans that are phase 1-2 trial, open label trials. We haven't implemented a control at this point in time. We might not know a clinically meaningful endpoint in our population, and especially for these rare neurological or neurodegenerative diseases. At this point in time, I mean, pre sort of now, we've really been encouraged our clients to, one, think about that for phase 1-2. Think about that phase 1-2 in the sense of how can we get as much as possible out of those patients, right? Because the reality is, for these ultra rare diseases and for rare diseases, we have few patients, right? And we have few patients to dose in a clinical trial program. So one, it's really supporting the design of that trial to consider early on what type of efficacy data we can get out of these populations, but also when to work with FDA on these questions of clinical endpoints and in trial designs. Now we have the FDA, launching a few pilot programs that have either rolled out just very recently or will roll out in 2024. There's the START program, which is meant to provide extra support for clinical trials for advancing rare disease therapeutics. This one specifically aims to sort of open up the channels of communication for sponsors and FDA, it offering more meetings, more informal conversations. And so this one will be hugely important for those that are having these conversations on a regular, is getting into the FDA, hopefully more often, to discuss clinical endpoints and challenges in these populations.
You said it very well. Like, these phase 1 trials for advanced therapies or in rare diseases often become like a healthy part of the ultimate dossier, right, that you're filing at BLA. And so having that kind of early interaction to design that trial in a way that gives you a robust data set to help build that case is somewhat crucial, because you can't go back in time and change how you did your phase 1. You sort of have to have a lot of things embedded from the start.
Exactly.
And that's different, right? From
created. Yeah, exactly.
I remember with small molecule drugs like that, the first in human is like, it's a SAD MAD. It's like a single ascending dose and then a multi-ascending dose. You don't really, maybe you can think about some endpoints in there, especially if it's something you could learn in either healthy volunteers or what have you. But like, there is not as much of an impetus to have really thought through, approvable endpoints before you start even your phase 1, as there is in rare disease, as there is in advanced therapies for rare disease.
Yeah, exactly. Which sort of brings me to this second program, and this is the rare disease endpoint advancement, which they've also launched recently. Starts for advancing rare disease therapeutics. The rare disease endpoint advancement program, this is entirely around like novel endpoints in rare diseases, where sponsors can even have like up to 4 meetings with FDA on these topics. This can even be around a natural history study, for instance, where the novel endpoint under discussion or under investigation is being investigated in. The caveat to this particular program is they're only accepting limited numbers of proposals. I think 1 a quarter at this point. But it's to specifically engage more often around these really difficult discussions that we're just spending hours and millions of dollars trying to home in on.
Yeah. What other programs are sort of either, imminent or on the horizon or already starting up?
There's one other one, and this is the complex innovative trial design. This is sort of around the idea to facilitate discussions around complex clinical trial approaches, but particularly for later stage pivotal trials. This is really, I suppose, in my opinion, in my belief, my understanding, it's come from this need for identifying unique or innovative trial designs in the gene therapy, in the advanced therapy space, where concurrent placebo controls, for instance, are often not ethical or even feasible. So really having these conversations with FDA on what does that pivotal trial look like in order to secure or attain the data that we need for approval, right? Having those conversations early on is incredibly important. And again, not just with FDA, but with global agencies.
Yeah. And I guess, how are you seeing, we've sort of touched a little bit on the concept of, the growth at CBER, and certainly at the last couple of policy summits, right? We've heard Nicole Verdun and Wilson Bryan talk about their efforts to hire and to increase the numbers of folks at CBER to address the large number of applications that they're getting and having to sort of manage. What are you seeing, anytime an organization grows quickly, whether it be a regulator or another one, like there's always challenges with that. Are you seeing, first of all, are we seeing good signs that the growth is occurring? And what are the challenges, and are there best practices that you share with your client about how to negotiate and navigate the growing pains that may be occurring there?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, in light of all these new programs, right? In light of the senior members of CBER talking about flexible reviews, in light of this sort of push to approve more gene therapies, to continue to and highly consider approving therapies under the accelerated approval pathway. Who's going to do all this work, right? We have seen people both leave and enter CBER, and specifically OTP. And while I think the office has grown, we are seeing that growth come from CDER, where they're bringing in more people who have previously been at CDER. We've also seen them bring, folks in that have not previously worked at FDA. So what that entails is training, right? Training on CBER regulations, training on the sort of how we do things at CBER. And I think in the interim, at least for us, we have seen some fairly conservative remarks. We've seen some fairly conservative feedback. We've had to go sort of an additional time or two, or ask for additional conversations to clarify points, to justify aspects or elements of a trial design, or to justify aspects or elements of non-clinical studies, for instance. So we have seen a little bit of an increase in sort of these conservative comments. However, that being said, at the exact same time, we've seen the flexibilities too. So we have been part of these conversations and part of these flexible reviews. So we've seen and maybe it's coming from the sort of senior members of the center, but we have seen flexibilities in their reviews, not only just in meeting responses and INDs, but even end of phases and in trial designs.
Right. And it sounds implicit in what you said. You might have an initial sort of conservative response, but like the fact that you can continue to engage and get clear on what both sides are trying to achieve, to potentially negotiate a central path towards success, like that. I think very much echoes for me my experience with CBER, which is they intend to collaborate, right? They welcome conversation.
Yeah, I mean, this alone, this pivotal time for CBER, these changes, these commitments, this acknowledgement of the need for complex and innovative trial designs, and at the same time, the growth occurring at an incredibly rapid pace, but also the necessity for working with people that understand these therapies, that have worked in these therapies, that have the background. It's really, it'll be interesting to see in the next couple of years what the impact of these programs and what the impact of CBER changes, the organizational changes and the growth has on the industry.
Yeah. And it sounds like maybe in the short term, like the practical advice might be to sponsors to read the submissions multiple times with sort of assumptions that people might be coming from not just a CBER background but maybe a CEDAR background, or a first time getting being a reviewer background, and making it as I guess as coherent and easy to follow as possible, that logic that was pursued by the
Yeah,
sponsor.
100%.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's sort of the same approach we talk about when we're, a sponsor who's never worked with CBER before. It's educating them, right? It's not worrying much about being, too detailed or too comprehensive. We've had CBER even tell us, when we're working with CEDAR, it's our packages are for pre-INDs or for type C meetings or end of phase meetings. Well, those are always large, but for pre-INDs even, it might be 100, 150 pages. Some of our packages going into CBER are 300 pages.
Wow.
And now it's not to go over 300 pages, but but yeah, they can be large.
Yeah.
And again, because we only have so few meetings with the agency, it's definitely about educating,
Yep.
our readers,
Yep.
reviewers, putting ourselves in their seat, seeing how busy they are, how sort of in some cases overworked they are, depending on their expertise and how many programs they're supporting, and how nice would it be to sit down and have everything laid out in an incredibly organized, comprehensive fashion. To me, that elicits a beautiful review. That elicits great feedback, right?
Yeah.
So always taking that into consideration before pressing submit.
Exactly. We've been talking a lot about, early submissions and whatnot. Let's talk about, trials that are ongoing. One of the things that you and I talked about in preparation for the call was, the challenges of long-term follow-up, in any drug trial, but also especially for advanced therapies, gene therapies, cell therapies, et cetera. And, one of the things, I've noted personally is that, we haven't yet as an industry, maybe published all of our long-term data. We don't really see a lot of publications of, say, 5-year data from some of the early AAV trials, et cetera, when at this point, there are a lot of trials out there where patients were starting to be dosed about 5 years ago. And so it's obviously regulatorily guided, this follow-up. So for non-integrating therapies, it's 5 years. For integrating ones or ones that change the genome, it's 15. And it seems like, first of all, I can put myself in the sponsor's shoes, right? Because it is hard to collect this data. It is hard to follow patients for this long. Patients move, patients, discontinue answering phone calls sometimes from the trialists. It is very, very difficult work. But on the flip side, right, I think about, when patients are signing up for our trials, they're signing up to give their sort of one shot on goal with us, right? They're, basically exempting themselves from any future gene therapy trials when they sign up for an AAV therapy, for instance. And so it does feel like there's an onus on us to continue to make sure that we as an industry publish all the data we have, so that we can continue to learn and grow as an industry and figure out what's working, what's not working, what needs to be improved to continue to deliver. And I'm curious your thoughts about long-term follow-up, and also sort of how we should negotiate this as an industry.
Yeah, this is always such a challenging topic, really, because there's no right answer, right? And even if there is, and even if there is a guidance, this is so challenging. These are emerging technologies, right? There's so much we don't know about long-term effects and potential delayed adverse events. Sadly, there's a lot we might have learned and already been able to discern about delayed or potential long-term effects if we as an industry had collected on all of this data, had collected as much data as possible in the last 20 years for every patient we dosed, right? This is collecting data, having these databases, publishing this data is one way, as we all know, how we even assess the risk of a gene therapy product from the beginning, by conducting investigations into published preclinical and clinical evidence from studies that potentially use a similar product as our own, or similar aspect of our product. The reality is, though, there's reality, right? The intent is there. And I really do feel as though the intent is there. The intent is there from FDA. However, FDA puts it, on the sponsor to conduct these studies and commit to these studies and submit their data, right? But the reality is, data collection, this is complex. There's a lot of complexities when it comes to data collection. And especially if you consider where most of the cell and gene therapies have focused, or are focused even. I mean, yes, we're seeing emerging technologies move into the clinic in non-rare diseases, but a lot of them are in rare diseases where patients are fragile. To expect patients, how much can we expect, right, from patients,
Right.
In the sense of these long-term follow-up protocols? Patients move on, patients drop out of clinical studies all the time, patients pass away, right? That's the sad reality of it, is how do we do this most effectively, but most realistically as well?
Absolutely.
And think about all the data we're trying to collect in active clinical trials, right? It takes a village.
It's something that I would love to see the industry take on as a challenge, and to try and figure out the best way to do it. What are the right standards we should have and hold ourselves to? That, I think, would really help to sort of move this forward. And I think the more experience, the more approvals we have, I predict we see the industry maybe take the lead on this, and figure out how to do it best.
Yeah, it would be great, and it's absolutely a topic of discussion and of really creative thinking, coming together and identifying potential solutions, even if they're not solutions for everything, right?
Right. And so, maybe just as a last question, I'm going to ask you my favorite question, which is, if you were given a magic wand and you could fix one thing for cell and gene therapy development, what would it be?
I love this question. I love this question, by the way. I ask my kids about, magic wands all the time. It's a hard question to answer though.
Yeah, it's funny. Like I came up with this question. I'll share mine. I came up with this question after sitting in like the umpteenth room where myself and a client were trying to figure out what countries we wanted to do the clinical trial in, because we needed to make sure that the primary label on the -80 frozen drug product was going to be acceptable in all the countries we wanted to go to. Because at this point, there's no global harmonization of what that label has to say. And also, like at this point, I was just trying to come up with an answer, which is like if someone came up with an adhesive that allowed you to over label a -80-degree vial, that would work too. Either one is fine, but it would just save so much headache and heartache trying to figure out how to do the right thing at such an early stage. So that's mine. Very, very super specific.
Yes, that is it. But you know what? You've been in you've been in what seems like probably millions of hours talking about that, right?
Right.
And yeah, I mean, geez, global harmonization in general, right?
Right.
When I think about, okay, a magic wand, like, can I have anything? Is this the same thing as three wishes, right? So,
Yes, you can have three. You can have three.
right, like reduced cost of goods, global genetic testing, honestly, that every gene identified in the causal pathway of these, rare diseases be included in neonatal or even prenatal screening. There's a lot, but one that is also potentially unreachable, right? But I think about all the time is to have the industry like share knowledge, and that industry and FDA work together in a transparent, incredibly transparent manner, in a vulnerable fashion, in a collaborative way, because ultimately that's the way to drive, in my opinion, these critical therapies to patients who need them the most. There's over 1,000 gene therapy clinical trials registered today, and a lot are under development for rare diseases, where most of these populations we're talking about are rapidly progressing, are desperate for a therapy that can make a difference in their lives. We have traditional gene therapies. We have novel gene editing technologies under development for just incredibly small populations who are quite fragile, tired, not well. And then we have sponsors facing a lot of the same challenges, and FDA presenting time and time again a lot of the same comments, a lot of the same issues. We're all trying to figure out those hidden messages between the lines in the FDA's responses. And we're all we're all not trying, but we are all spending tons of money and time doing that, reading between the lines, discerning what FDA might mean by their feedback, determining how to overcome challenges, how to overcome the hurdles, thinking about what does FDA know that we don't know? What other products like this have they seen? And again, I sort of keep pointing fingers to FDA, but really regulators, health authorities in general, to decipher what the FDA wants us to do. That's where the money is being spent. And then we're taking risks in developing a solution or studies to overcome those challenges right before we even ever go back to FDA. Those conversations just take months, years sometimes. And so if I wave my magic wand, I can imagine a world where everyone sat in a room together, competitors, key opinion leaders, health authorities, FDA, EMA, all of them, all these brilliant minds, all of these with all these brilliant technologies, and really hashed out these issues in real time. Put all their egos aside, right? All their jobs aside.
Right.
And move past the hurdles and the challenges together in a steadfast way.
Yeah.
Maybe not amazing for RareMoon's business, but I'd happily take a hit on this service that we provide for the greater of mankind, the greater of the world. And who knows, maybe we'd be sitting in the room as well.
Yeah. No, I love that vision. people talk a lot about, pre-competitive knowledge sharing. And I think that this is sort of, your vision is taking that to the sort of nth degree of let's just do it. Let's just figure this out.
Let's just do it together. Let's share. Sharing is caring, right?
Exactly. Exactly. Awesome. Well, I, for one, hope that we at least start taking steps towards such a future. And in the meantime, I think you and I'll both be, sitting on our respective development teams, trying to help them navigate the present. And, thank you so much, Sabrina, for taking time and chatting with us and thinking about these tough issues and also everything you do with your clients, right? To help the pursuit of novel gene and cell therapies be efficient and also robust, right? I think that, we said it at the top of the interview, this is a team sport. And thank you for everything you do for your teams.
Thank you so much, Emily. Received with all the gratitude in the world. And yeah, this conversation has been awesome. Let's start our own podcast, right?
Exactly.
Keep talking about it. I love these conversations, but no, absolutely. And really, thank you. I feel honored to represent my team and have this conversation and share my thoughts.
Well, and I think we'll have to have you back in a year and a half to do another temperature taking of how things are going with CBER's growth.
Exactly. I can't wait to talk about it. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much.